Martin Wilsey.
Hey, I'm Shane McGalley.
And I'm David Keener.
And this is the Hourlings podcast project. Tonight, we're going to be talking about B plots, and Shay's going to be leading the conversation. Shay, take it away.
All right, guys. Yeah, this is a good topic. I'm excited for it. So for those who might be new to the vocabulary of A plot and B plot, it's something that authors really need to learn how to balance. The A plot, of course, as its name might suggest, is the primary plot, the primary objective of your hero or the obstacle to overcome. And then B plots are plots that are secondary to that pursuit. Oftentimes they are romances. They could be sometimes a mystery. Sometimes a mystery can be a B plot. They can be, oh gosh, what are the B plot tropes, if you will? Can you guys think of?
Well, as you said, they can be a romance. They could be a mystery that needs to be solved. They could be some sort of revelation that is perhaps unexpected. Mm-hmm. You are actually the heir to the kingdom. You are.
I've seen B plots that were all revealed in flashback sequences.
Okay, so they can be like.
You'll find out why a character is motivated to do a thing.
Okay, so like origin story B plots.
Right.
Interesting.
The other thing, well, B plots can also emphasize perhaps the theme of the story.
Yeah, I think that a good B plot probably does. Is there an example you're thinking of?
Sure. In one of my stories, the hero is this is Death Comes to Town. The hero is hunting down a supernatural murderer, but the underlying theme of the story is he's a retired legionnaire who's spent his 25 years in service, and he's lost the only family he's ever known, the army. And so what he's really putting together, and doesn't really realize it to the end, is he's putting together a new family. And he doesn't know it until the end.
Yeah, I would say B plots are often very, well, I don't want to generalize too much, but the ones that I write the most are emotional. So B plots tend to be emotional for me. They're either, relationship driven, family driven, like I said, romance driven, whereas the A plot tends to be more of the action. I suppose you could have it flip-flopped, if it's a romance novel, I suppose you could have the action be the B plot, right? I don't know if you guys are huge Harlequin fans or you're getting kind of blank stares, but I've seen it happen before.
I am familiar with Harlequins. My mother used to read them all the time, so I know about Harlequin and the Harlequin Silhouette.
Yeah, in that context, usually you'll have the primary romance between the two love interests, but the B plot would be a secondary love,
like a mystery again.
Love interest where they're, each of their sidekicks get together.
Oh,
or
yeah.
The widowed parent finds the lady that runs the bakery in the small town.
Listen, I love when like romance is like shamelessly the A plot, and the B plot is something like almost kind of silly, or like a cooking contest, or something a very very Hallmark movie type B plot for you there. But yeah, I think B plots can be a struggle for new authors, because when you think about it, you're balancing, with each plot, whether it's A plot or B plot, you have to make the time to move it along at a decent pace. And so it's kind of like you're fanning this fire, and then you got to run over and fan this fire, and then you got to run over and fan that fire, so that both of them move along and sometimes intertwine. So do you guys find B plots to be challenging, or do you think it's just very natural to your rhythm at this point?
For me, it's natural, because I always write novel length stuff, and they always contain primary and secondary tertiary plots. The short stories I write typically do not have B plots, because they're concise enough that you don't have the time or the word count to add an additional complexity. Though I've seen short stories with B plots in them. You gotta write lean to do that, though.
I'm in the middle, because a lot of what I've written has been novelettes or novella length. I tend to have B plots, I probably don't have the complexity that Marty has in some of his novels, but I still have some B plots that feed in, to the main plot line.
Yeah, I would agree that I don't find B plots particularly challenging, because, like I mentioned, they tend to do the emotional labor of my writing, which just really fleshes it out, and it's something that naturally has to be there anyway. So it's almost like I couldn't imagine executing a novel without an A plot and a B plot. They always go together for me.
Yeah, me too. And in fact, a lot of times the B plots are a specific tool that I'll use to reveal the diabolical nature of the antagonist, for instance.
Yeah.
It's the kick the dog kind of plot of the story to show who the villain is. And it's a good tool for that.
Or sometimes I use the B plot to reveal something that's going to change the direction of the A plot. I can't think of a good example right now, but
okay. Yeah, we were talking before the episode about B plot and subplot, and for me those are synonymous, but do you think that there is a very fine differentiation?
Yeah, once we started talking about it, in my mind, there's two kinds of plots like that. The B plots are usually action that happens completely independent of the main story as it rolls along, like a different location or something completely different, where in the end of the story they come together. Subplots are little tinier plots that happen to a protagonist in the main storyline. How does he break out of the jail? That's a subplot of the grander story.
And of course, I somewhat disagree, but I suspect that subplots and B plots are on a spectrum.
Yeah.
Where one end,
I totally agree with that.
And one end is a B plot that's totally separate until it comes together at the end. On the other side is a subplot that is perhaps inconsequential to the hero's goals, but adds some depth to the story or some depth to one of the sub characters. And in the middle are things where your B plot may be intertwined with your main plot and touch points with it at a number of different occasions, and then also affect the ending, and perhaps give you the emotional hook that makes the A plot really come to fruition.
It sounds like the subplot then is more dependent on the A plot than the B plot is on the A plot. Is that correct? By the definition you're reading?
I think
it's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah, is how I would interpret it. Because unless you're being specific about a specific story, it could be anything, honestly.
Yeah, because the B plot should be baked in. Otherwise, it's an interruption in your story. So it's got to be kind of integrated in, so that it matters for the A story as well.
See, for me, B plots, subplots, they're all baked in.
Yeah.
So that's a hard differentiator for me.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm convinced that they're different yet. Maybe I still need to.
And in fact, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know what it is when you see one, though.
Right. So a lot like, adding a point of view to a story, and that makes it, that adds a good degree of length to your story. B plots do the same thing, right? They make your story, I'd say like a third longer, maybe a little less, quarter longer, depending on how many you have.
So the rule of thumb that I've heard is for every major viewpoint that you add to your story, you double the length of your story. Right, and I'd say something similar to your probably occurs for your B plots.
I don't know if I would say that they double it. That double might be a little.
I agree. I don't necessarily know that it doubles, but it's definitely going to be a factor.
Yeah, about a third. Have you guys ever tried to juggle too many B plots in one novel? I
absolutely have.
Yeah.
And they end up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, same.
What's too many?
I am really, really trying to be more precise on the first draft than I used to be. 250,000 words on a first draft, and then you got to go come back and edit the thing with a chainsaw, and I usually mess something up, and so being better at plotting stuff out, and so I have to edit less out.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I've definitely struggled with too many B plots before. One time, like an example, I had a secondary character had a revenge story, and by the time the climax came and the secondary character got the opportunity to take his revenge, I had to like totally deviate from the main character to show this fight scene between the secondary character, and the villain, or it wasn't even the main villain, one of the villains. And I realized, well, I guess I can't really do this because I really am taking like a sideways step off of the track to accomplish that B, to make that B plot come to fruition, and therefore it just didn't work. It just didn't work that way. So that's my story.
And some things end up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
I will say, however, that B plots is not synonymous with a number of POVs.
Right.
So, for instance, I've had battle scenes in stories where I've had 5 POVs and I'm switching back and forth between them, but really I'm showing different angles of the battle. I'm not really showing a different plot. I'm showing the A plot, the battle, and the B plot is something else. And in this case, you saw more of the B plot before and during and after the battle.
So, as someone who has been published and worked with editors in YA, I can tell you that having a romance B plot is mandatory for YA. If you don't have it in there, they're going to demand it be in there. But I will say I like romance B plots, and I think many readers do as well. I think it's like just the right amount of romance when it's a secondary thread. And so I want to dive deeper and see what you guys think. Like, how often do you make a romance a B plot? Every book?
Not every book. My most popular novel, Virtues of the Vicious, has a romance B plot, and I've gotten really great feedback about that too.
Okay.
Let's see. Death Comes to Town has a romance B plot, and Clash by Night has a romance B plot. Although the longer version is going to improve on that a little bit. So it's a little weak in the original version.
Okay. And do you like romance B plots too?
I like showing. So a lot of my stories are actually parts of series, and I want you to think that these people are really alive, plausible, and that you're seeing into their lives. So for that reason, I want them to experience the things that people experience in real life. That includes romance, fights, parental issues, arguments,
And Marty, you were talking earlier about the flashback B plot. That's kind of interesting. I want to talk about that one more too. You kind of flashback, even the flash forward B plot.
Yeah, you can. Sometimes I've read in books where they'll have an ongoing flashback to actually give you the background information about something that has happened in the past, that by the time you get to the end of the story, suddenly it becomes germane that this guy is a professional gunslinger in real life. And so when it happens, suddenly, that this guy who's been a pacifist in the main story suddenly opens a can of whoop ass. Oh, we understand why.
I think the classic example for me of this is Gateway by Frederick Pohl, the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novel. It's got 2 separate plot lines. In one, Robinette Broadhead is the richest man in the solar system, and he's seeing an AI psychologist because he's got issues. And in the other one, older, as a younger man, he's participating in a lottery at an alien space station, abandoned, to go out on these alien spaceships that were left behind and get rich or not get rich based on what they find, or and they might not even come back. To make a long story short, it's got the past story, the future story, and in between it's got these little interstitials, which are like commercials and everything, and all of those things add up for you to understand the ending. It's a tour de force. There's your B plot with the flashbacks.
I'll tell you the B plot that I don't like. Okay. I don't like when the B plot is basically just justifying there being a book in the first place. For example, let's say that you have like a novel that takes place in the Swiss Alps, and you just want to like have your character be in the Swiss Alps because they're cool and pretty, and like that is basically the A plot, is that you're traveling through the Swiss Alps, and the B plot is, you know, something like there's, you know, a farm that's going to be foreclosed in the Swiss Alps, and you need to help it raise money to not be foreclosed. But, you know, like it's like technically the B plot. I don't like those types of B plots that are just, they're clearly disproportionately strength. I don't think strength is a word, but you know what I mean.
That sounds more like a framing device.
Yeah.
Which I'm
Well,
not.
I don't like them.
Yeah, I think that I might add on that.
Okay.
I hate B plots that end up being you know, an ex machina kind of pull a rabbit out of your hat B plot. I hate those.
Yeah. What B plots grind your gears, Dave?
Well, I think you mentioned one. I'm not a big fan of framing devices unless you can integrate them in better. And anytime you tell your story kind of out of order, there has to be a reason for it. It's usually information flow, you know, controlling what the reader knows and when he knows it.
I mean, I guess just in general, when the A plot is weaker than the B plot, I don't like either plot. Does that make sense? Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
And I have seen that.
Yeah.
I read a military SF book that was half flashback and half in what was the current story time, and I liked the current story time story, and I hated the flashback.
Huh.
It is, you know, very, very disconcerting.
Yeah, and that just goes to show that they really need to complement each other in order for it to work. Like if one is not strong, the other will likely not be very strong either. So yeah, it's yet another challenge of mastering novelism, being able to balance these two. So what else? Is there any like great B plots you want to talk about, or like kick-ass ones in your own novel?
Well, in my novel, Virtues and the Vicious, my reader's favorite B plot is about the cat.
The cat.
The novel has this cat in the book. It's funny because the beta readers, when they read the book, universally all 12 of them said, "Oh, I love the book, but I gotta have more cat." And so I ended up adding a lot of extra B plot that revealed the, you know, proclivities and backstory of the stupid cat.
That reminds me. I mean, I've had instances where, you know, you take some right into the group and you get feedback about your B plot, and people are like, "This is awesome. I want more of this." And I think I could think of at least one example where it encouraged me to make a B plot more of an A plot. You know, when something with a character was working so well and they wanted more of it, you know, I just promoted that character, I suppose you could say. So that's happened to me before too.
So
how about you guys?
I had the case of the vanishing B plot.
Oh no, what's that?
So I Death Comes to Town. I wrote a story in which the hero was going to be duking it out with a supernatural monster that had come to town. So it was going to be alternating chapters. The hero figures something out, the monster does something else, the hero figures it out, the monster does something else. And I found out that I didn't need the monster chapters because it was more fun watching the hero figure things out. And so the B plot really became him putting together his erstwhile family, and the original B plot from the perspective of the monster went away. I didn't need it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, feedback can certainly help you with that too. When you present something or come back to it after a while, your B plots definitely contrast.
Well,
When
it
you-
worked in my outline. It didn't work when I started writing the B plot chapters. So away they went before I
Cutting
finished
room
writing them all.
4. Yeah, in some ways similar to foreshadowing. My rule of thumb when doing a B plot is, depending on the length of the story. For foreshadowing, I try to mention something 3 times, subtly, before I can say, okay, that's a solid weave in of a foreshadowing. For B plots, I would, just if we're giving advice to our viewers, I would give yourself a quota of how many times you need to make sure that you get that point across. So you mention this guy or whatever before you do the reveal, because if you don't set it up well enough, then it's not going to have any payoff. So I would just make sure that you're doing that at appropriate times throughout the structure of the story. What do you guys think about structuring and timing and?
All depends on the story.
All
It
depends.
depends on
Really
what,
different for every story.
depends on
Yeah.
what you can do.
Yeah.
One of my favorite B plots was, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie The Cotton Club.
No.
Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola. There's 2 plots. One is about an African American tap dancer, and the other is about Richard Gere as a gangster who gets kind of caught up in the gangster underworld, and the romance that he falls in love with the boss's girlfriend. And these 2 plot lines are completely separate from the entire movie, except the 2 main characters from each plot line know each other, and they cross paths a couple times in the stories. And then there's sort of a connection at the end.
Yeah.
It's really weird. Some people hated it. I thought it was awesome. So some people can have different reactions to a widely separated B plot.
So before we close out, do you guys have any advice for our viewers about, how do you write a B plot differently than an A plot, or any tricks of the trade?
I think they're written the same. Just write a story that doesn't suck, however many plots you got.
I don't know if I could give you a rule of thumb or anything for
Yeah.
adding a B plot. To me, to me, it's something that comes integrally out of the plot.
Yeah.
If I haven't bastardized the word too much, that helps add richness to the A plot. Sometimes they come out of nowhere, so I can't really say that I have a rule of thumb for how to figure out what they should be.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with both of you. I think they are written most of the same. They should be natural, so there shouldn't be too much divorce from the A plot. I guess the only warning I'd reiterate is just having too many of them. You gotta be willing to cut them if they're not weaving together naturally and they're just sort of distracting, especially at your. And I think the way that you'll know that they weren't working, unfortunately, you won't know until the end. For me, anyway, that's my experience. That by the climax, if a B plot of mine is not resolving smoothly, or just seems to be taking up too much time from the climax and is a distraction, that's when I know the B plot wasn't working. Maybe you guys know how to catch it earlier.
You're a pantser, aren't you?
But I am, yes.
Right.
How did you know?
I tend to, and I think Marty is probably the same. I tend to catch them at the outline stage.
Catch 'em
Yeah, me
earlier.
too.
That's
Usually.
Good. That's good.
Except in cases like the one I mentioned earlier where the B plot disappeared on me.
Yeah, well, one of the perks, but pros and cons. There's an episode for that. We'll link it. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hope it was an A plot episode though, even though our topic says otherwise. I had fun.
Cool.
Good to go. All right.
Good to go. And we'll see you all again next time. Thanks.